Well, welcome back to my lore thoughts and analyzing. It's been a while since I finished Saint, hasn't it? Now, more accurately than this presentation is telling you, this is more of a post-Downpour as a whole. In fact, it's just kind of after the entire game before Watcher, pretty much. That said, there's still some things I still obviously haven't done yet, and so for the time being, we're gonna keep these out of the video and the comments. Stuff such as the Gourmand food quest. I still haven't done that, and I think that's important for something. Probably not relevant to anything I'm talking about today, though. Then, of course, we don't want any alternate ending spoilers, like I got the Vengeance, I guess you could say, ending of Artificer, and it was only after that I realized there was another option. This also includes just any or all Ascension endings, but I don't think there's much important there anyway. And then also, no fun fact spoilers. Like, the reason Saint is here is because it's like, oh, by the way, if you had Ascended Looks to the Moon as well, then Looks to the Moon would have been in the Rubicon or something like that, right? Just sticking to what I know here. I have some thoughts. Now, Saint was a really interesting one all about cycles. And more directly than any other point in the story, it calls into question my concept of what they even are. I didn't even know until, like, halfway through the slug cats, I don't even know, Rivulet really, when I started doing the pearls, that like a cycle of sort of reincarnation, or like, I didn't even know that was a thing for most of my experience playing the game. But obviously it's pretty central, I guess you could say, to a lot of what the lore is about. Now, in one of my very last episodes of Saint, I happened to bring up this sequence, right? In the Void Sea in Survivor, when there's a whole bunch of different versions of me. This quote by Five Pebbles right here in Saint, right? This place is not real, a dream from outside, as if every cycle of my existence has knotted together with another's, even if only for a fraction of a second it ripples through mine. I feel like that's a good description of what Rubicon is, or at least as it appears to us. However, to me, it also feels kind of related to, like, this Void Sea sequence in Survivor. It got me thinking, are these, like, me from every possible cycle? Because in the very beginning, when I very first saw a second one appear on the screen, I assumed, well, maybe there's just another Slugcat, you know? But they're all me in the sense that as I am controlling the Slugcat, they all move around with me. They're all like versions of me. So it makes me think, like, is it like me from all other like timelines, cycles? Are we all, because I mean, I feel like if all the cycles are fated to end up the same way, then if you ascend in one of them, you ascend in all of them. And from a different sort of perspective, that doesn't make any sense. So another question about cycles I have, is an in-game cycle a canonical cycle? This is something that's hard for me to answer, but kind of feels like maybe yes. I guess in a way, technically, gameplay mechanic-wise, when I die, I wake up again. Everyone knows it. I don't know if that's exactly how it works, and I'm somewhat resistant to thinking of cycles that way, but I can't deny that, like, the karma that I'm at is, like, it does ascend or descend depending on how well I'm doing through these cycles, and the karma that I'm at is acknowledged throughout the game by the gates, and the karma that I have is a system itself acknowledged by the iterators in this game. So it doesn't seem that crazy to canonize the cycles themselves, especially because of echoes. At least Downpour seems to sort of advance. When I first met Looks to the Moon in Saint, it felt like Looks to the Moon had no memory of the cycle in which I collected that echo. You know what I mean? And every time I do collect an echo, I mean, the cycle technically, I don't even remember. I should have checked this before recording, but like, I don't even think the cycle advances. I think it's still the same cycle. I mean, it might as well. I know your karma goes up and you start from where you were at the beginning of that same cycle, but it's almost like an alternate, like a deviation, if you will. But from another perspective of cycles, that doesn't make any sense at all. And so, of course, we turn to pearls to help us understand, well, what is this life and death thing exactly? Is it like reincarnation? Are we living like the literal same lives? Is it literally the game mechanic as we see and play it? Well, thankfully, the pearls clear this up very well, because they're a ring or a spiral or a spirally ring. Which of course means the ancients actually just had no clue. We could all just agree on the basis, and I think that's where I'm going to leave this entire cyclical discussion. The discussion also gets more complicated when you factor in the fact that, like, at the very end of Saint, you go back to, like, the beginning of Saint. And I feel like, if anything, the only different version of that world that you enter is that you might be entering a world where the beings I've previously ascended as Saint are already ascended because they were ascended. But I don't even think that makes sense in the context of timelines. So it almost seems more likely that Saint is somehow just living the exact same journey over and over again in like a potentially infinite number of cycles. A ring, a spiral. All I know is Saint's lifespan isn't going to end. Saint doesn't get to ascend. And I at least like to hope, to believe, that Saint is overall making a positive impact and not just that like any progress they make just gets immediately reset. So yeah, basically, it's been like a month since I ended Saint, and cycles still confuse me. Who's right? Who's wrong? You decide. I believe that it's kind of like written to be up to interpretation anyway. And I know I'm supposed to be like, what, a theorizer? I theorize. I'm not like that hyped up to make a theory about these cycles, like a cohesive theory. I'll leave that to other people because I kind of just don't want to touch it. It's up to interpretation, and as a person, I refuse to interpret it. I feel like there's still a lot to be said about the game's lore while referring to cycles simply as cycles without specifying, well, what the heck do we actually mean by that? Anyways, to change topics, this is going to be one of the most obvious ones of all. Saint equals Echo. I mean, kind of. An Echo-like sort of creature. Now, I don't believe it's going to be exactly like the Echoes as described in the pearl that we have about Echoes, because the pearl that we have that mentions the possibility of Echoes talks about just in general the rumors that if your ego was big enough, then an echo of your pompousness would get left behind. Now, of course, Saint could be quite a pompous, slug cat, but I feel like if mechanically this is possible, and it seems in world there already wasn't a lot of information on, these pompous echoes, they were merely just rumors. So as far as Saint goes, I feel like it's very plausible that they're just something new, echo-wise, that wouldn't have been discussed, and that perhaps Saint is tied here for more altruistic purposes, I guess you could say. Moving on, I want to have a brief discussion on the Rot. This is mostly a post-Spearmaster discussion because I just kind of got really confused by that, I think. I was too lazy to bring up exactly what in Spearmaster made me convinced that, like it just seemed like that Five Pebbles was blaming Seven Red Suns, potentially, I believe the illegal information that he gave Five Pebbles, for the situation that Five Pebbles was dealing with then, which I initially first thought was he was in the middle of going through with the plan itself, the breeding program or whatnot, the organic sort of experiments he's doing to try and rewrite his own genomes. But I believe, and I wish I had pulled up Five Pebbles dialogue on this, but in Spearmaster, it felt like to me, he was almost blaming Seven Red Suns for the Rot. And regardless of whether he actually said or implied that or not, I just wanted to have a quick discussion on, do I think the Rot is a direct result specifically of the illegal information from that pearl? That Five Pebbles tried a breeding program, did an experiment, and it was that which got interrupted, led to an unfortunate development, right? And I feel like, I think that that's a timeline that makes sense. I don't really see a problem with that timeline, especially because the Rot seems very specific to Five Pebbles as an iterator. It's almost certain that whatever the Rot is probably a result of something Five Pebbles has done, and the only direct thing we know Five Pebbles has done or has been working on was this breeding program from back then, right? So it all makes sense. However, I wanted to just bring up whether, I guess the base game exactly was saying this. Because in base game Pearls, we have it referred to as an infection. Five Pebbles was throwing away, infected materials. Looks to the Moon also referred to it as a corruption. And then I believe Chasing Wind in the conversation with Seven Red Suns, and this is the part that kind of confuses me a bit and throws me off, is that Chasing Wind, based on intel from Unparalleled Innocence, claims that Five Pebbles, quote, has got the Rot. Now, the reason this phrase throws the idea I was discussing into a bit of confusion for me is that, to me, it sounds like, maybe it's just a me thing, it sounds like saying someone's got the Rot makes it sound like the Rot is a known thing. If you're telling Seven Red Suns about this for the first time, and the Rot is something new, formed from some crazy experiment only Five Pebbles has really done, then why wouldn't you explain a little more about what this so-called the Rot is, this unfortunate development? Of course, it's always possible. I mean, this information didn't originate with Five Pebbles, so it's possible maybe other iterators have fell to a Rot-like situations before, in which case Five Pebbles really should have been warned or at least been aware of such cases before trying himself. But I don't think that's really the case. Basically, my question is like, is the rot a known entity, already known? Because in some ways it kind of seems like that, but it being the result of Five Pebbles' failed experiment, and not just failed experiments in general, but specifically the failed experiment, would make Spearmaster make a bit more sense, I guess. That's all I wanted to say. Now we've got this. The only reason this is in here is because this is a question I was sort of existentially asking myself, even in Saint. It's like, why resurrect Moon? And obviously, of course, by the end of Saint, I realized, oh, because Moon is resurrected, and because Five Pebbles at all, in any form, still remains, Saint obviously can still ascend them, and that's good. Like, that is very good. I still want to go back into Saint maybe one day and ascend Looks at the Moon as well, because I feel like I owe it to her, now that I'm fully confident that that's what it was. But we'll see about that. In any case, Looks at the Moon and the other iterators couldn't have known that Saint would come by and Ascension was actually a real possibility somehow for them, right? Well, I think at the end of Spearmaster actually answers my own question, because I believe Looks at the Moon wishes them luck on solving the problem. And I believe she seemed a bit more optimistic, maybe to a fault, but hey, even some of the iterators agreed that, technically speaking, like, if there's a shot at global ascension, even if your bug's in the maze trying to figure it out, one day the bug might escape the maze, you know? An answer could be found. Maybe she believed in Sliver of Straw. I guess it's just, she had hope, and also, I guess it was just, as long as the slimmest chance of hope of possible global ascension, which would include yourself, the iterators, existed, then for a lot of iterators, I guess, that was worth living for. Especially since for as long as the iterators' equipment remain functional in any capacity, they are currently probably the best chance at finding that so-called triple affirmative. So, all right, then my last thing I wanted to talk about was actually kind of random. It's on the astronomy of this world. So I was looking through pearls again, and I noticed the phrase used by some of the ancients twice in the same pearl, as long as the stars remain fixed in their celestial spheres. Now, I was like, I feel like that's vaguely familiar. So I looked it up, and turns out I didn't learn this in school, but it was a real theory, like a celestial model. I'm sure plenty of you already knew that, but if you didn't, now you know. You could look it up, but it was an actual, ancient sort of understanding of the world's stars, is that, there was some sort of sphere, right, around the Earth that contained the different stars, multiple even, perhaps stacked on top of each other, like nestled inside of each other, that each contained like the stars or the planets, and it was the movements of these spheres that determined their movements. Now, making the assumption that this phrase is a reference to and means something similar to the real life ancient theory of astronomy, going off of that assumption, this could mean a few things for Rainworld, which is one, this is just an ancient phrase from a previous understanding of the world's astronomy. Two, this is the actual ancients' understanding of astronomy at the time of writing this pearl. Or three, this is the actual astronomy of this world. This latter explanation is actually a possibility, especially when we realize that Moon has asked the question. I mean, she didn't ask it, she answered it. She asked it to answer it, as she's explaining to me how, as the ground rises up, the sediment at the bottom of the world is also eaten up, which I guess just means that the world is slowly falling, I guess, at the same rate, and thus not ascending closer to the sky, because this is supposedly the answer for why doesn't the ground collide with the sky? Now, either this is just like ironic in the way that the civilization may have never actually been like spacefaring, may have never actually figured out space, or their world is actually like this, because on the other hand, like no real world, I did look into this, no real world phenomena really explains, the dust that always settles at the top of the world here that Looks at the Moon speaks of. It's like wind, volcanoes, etc. But especially with the context that the material at the bottom of the world that gets eaten away is leaving the physical world, something deeply wrong is with this world's astronomy anyway, and the rules of it. So I do find it interesting that, like, if the Void Sea didn't exist, might that be possible in Rainworld? So these are just some of the things that I wanted to address, just some of the thoughts I had. And now for our last segment of the video, I'm going to be addressing a comment I got on my Saint finale. Thank you, Trollo. Thank you, Trollololo. Thank you, Trollololo. Thank you, Trollololo. Thank you, Trollololo 720. Trollololo 720 for your 4 questions. I'm going to answer your first 3 of them. And thank you for giving me extra content to throw at the end of this video. Makes my job a bit easier, but we're going to finish it off with your first question. What was Rain World about? Thematically, at least. Now, I think every person interprets a game like through their own different or personal lens or whatever. I've heard a lot of different variations on, the ending of other games I've played through, and it tells me a lot about the person, I guess, to learn what the game means or is about to them. I don't expect to get a right answer here. I'll just tell you what I get from it. The first theme I got from the game, and lasted for quite a while, until I first met Five Pebbles really, was simply insignificance. This is probably because it's like a sandbox ecosystem type of game, and not like a main character save the world with the main quest sort of game. But considering like going about life in Rain World is simply a lot of death, a lot of cycles, a lot of trying, a lot of struggling to overcome, the game really makes you feel like you're just a set piece in a larger, grander story, bigger than you can possibly comprehend or even impact. Now, I think this theme, especially about like being able to directly influence the fate of the world, I think that started going away a little bit in Downpour, what Downpour focuses on. Downpour seemed a lot more about, obviously, the Slugcat's personal journeys with stuff like Gourmand and Artificer, but also a lot about Rainworld being a tale of 2 gods. There's hope, there's depression, there's betrayal. It's a very tragic story, and Downpour does wonders in expanding it. With my favorite part being the reconciliation to an extent between Five Pebbles and Looks of the Moon. And then maybe now just the idea that somehow with Saint, their stories really can end in Ascension. Now, thirdly and most obviously, Rain World is a game about circles, cycles, about breaking free from, I guess, the meaningless of the repetition and the monotony. That's what the civilization was all about. That's what Global Ascension was all about. That's what Five Pebbles' internal struggles were all about. It was the meaninglessness of being alive. And that feels a little weird to say because I don't think that I don't think I can firmly say that there's like a counter message to that either in the game. Looks of the Moon is the only one that springs to mind, what with her seeming hope for global ascension. But I'd be lying if I said that hope didn't also feel at least a little bit futile to me. It's just my personal opinion. I don't think the iterators were actually going to be ending up finding a triple affirmative before all their equipment erodes and they all die. It doesn't exactly seem like it's going to be the scenario. I guess the best hope in the game is of Ascension itself, which not everyone has access to, but for every individual story, it's a possibility. Even the iterators in the end, at least 2 of them. So, I don't know, these are just kind of my thoughts. Feel free to answer this one in the comments. I'd be quite interested to know what it means to anyone else. Our second question here is, what campaigns do I think I'm 100% done with? Honestly, probably none. If I had to guess, then I'm probably good on Survivor. By 100% done, I mean, am I missing content specific to that campaign? Obviously, with Survivor, I guess I could go to the Outer Expanse. I'm slightly less certain on Monk. There might be something maybe, but I don't know for sure. Obviously, I haven't completed Hunter yet. I still have a food quest to do in Gourmand. I know for sure there's an alternate ending for Artificer, and for really most of the Slugcats. Obviously, I haven't done the Metropolis Pearl, so if that counts, then I know I haven't done that. Or, of course, Five Pebbles' interpretation of all the pearls. I sure hope there's nothing left in Spearmaster, because I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that. And the biggest thing that comes to mind in Saint is, I'm curious what happens if I ascend Moon and if Rubicon is going to be different. That said, going forward, we're going to see how I decide to approach all of this. I'm still thinking, personally, on how I want to do that. Now, speaking of how I want to approach all this, your third question was lore video reaction. How do I feel about that now? I've said this in a few comments before, but I kind of want to make a lore video of my own first. And it's not going to be a typical lore video. I'm by no means an expert in compiling information unless I really had access to a wiki and knew what I was talking about. People would want to watch a lore video by me to learn how much I learned without using the wiki or by watching other videos, like by seeing my perspective on it all anyway, for my perspective on it all, and by no means for it to be like a comprehensive matter of fact, this is the case. And so I'm thinking if I were to make a proper lore video, then it would be more of like a review of Rainworld's approach to lore, if that makes sense. Because it would be more like a video essay of me explaining, recapping from the top, my personal progression and my understanding of Rainworld's lore and how it developed, when and where, and the story of each of my, slug cats, I guess. Well, also maybe commenting on how Rainworld's doing it. I don't know, as a sort of like review, because I do really like Rainworld's lore. So to actually answer the question, if I were to do that, first off, I don't like just reacting to other people's videos, especially because I don't have I don't use my camera. I'm also not a VTuber, and I'm also not even a PNG tuber. So like a reaction video on my channel would very much just visually look like me playing the actual video. I might get myself a PNG to actually like fix that sort of situation, because I'm just not personally comfortable with visually just taking somebody's video. Also, ideally, I'd like, some sort of permissions or confirmations that it's okay by the person who made the video for people to be reacting to it. And thirdly, oh shit, a train is coming. I'm really running out of time. I'm just gonna talk over the train, okay? Thirdly, I would want to make sure I put in enough effort, as much effort into my response, I guess, to a lore video to warrant it as transformative, and not just some sort of like bare minimum standard of transformative, but sufficiently so. So I'm not opposed to the idea, but for me at least, reaction content just in general is something that I have a lot of like hoops that I myself would want to jump through before I do that. And at least for now, there's a lore video I want to make on my own before I fully take a look at someone else's lore, I guess, compilation. Oh god, the train is still here. Well, thank you everybody for watching. Speaking of watching, thanks for watching.